Amer, first of all, thank you for joining us. We're really blessed and thrilled and honored that you are with us today. And to our biggest surprise, your dad is with us today as well, Amer Zahr, who is an AUB graduate. So we're really glad that both of you are with us today. And of course, all the other AUBites that are joining us today and the alumni. I can't say more about how important AUB is for us and for Lebanon and for the area. Today we heard that the Lebanese pound turned, the dollar is equivalent to 7,000 Lebanese pounds, and the people are on the street. This is the time where, I don't know when it would be the time if it's not now, to support AUB, to support Lebanon, to support the entire people in the Middle East. Everybody relies on our support and continuous support, if not financially, at least politically. And that's why we have Amer with us today. And I don't think Amer needs an introduction, but if you don't know Amer is an Arab Palestinian American who was who lived. He grew up in Detroit, but he's a comedian. He's a political activist. He's a civil rights activist as well. He's been involved politically with Bernie Sanders during his presidential campaign in 2016. He was the surrogate presidential candidate for Bernie Sanders 2016. Amer did a couple of TED Talks. He was on. He was invited to Carnegie Hall, to the Kennedy Center, where he did multiple stand-up comedies. His comedy is very political, is sharp, is agile, and to the point. It does promote justice, equality, but also promotes and helps support the Arab American cause and the Palestinian cause in particular in the US in a very smart way. And I want to stop here because I don't want to take from your time. I know everybody's waiting to talk to Amer. We were going to do this presentation a little bit different than the previous times. Amer insisted that he wants to have an interaction with the attendees. So those who have cameras and wants to be on the camera, go for it. The way we're going to do it is you can send your questions by chat, like last time. But if you really want to ask a question and interact with Amer directly, you can raise your hand and we will unmute you and have you ask the question directly to Amer. And before I start the discussion with Amer, we're going to play this short video so you understand how smart Amer's comedy is to relay the message to the American people.
Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? Wonderful. I'm so happy to be back here today. I'm from Dearborn, Michigan. I don't know if anybody heard of Dearborn, Michigan. I'm an Arab American. Sorry, white people, don't be scared. But every 10 years in America, I want to talk about something. Every 10 years in America, we do a census. You know, we have to do it. It's in the Constitution. We, the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, blah, blah, blah. And when you do the census, they ask you stuff. They ask you, what's your name? What's your address? And then they get to these questions about race. And everybody has a box on the census form. But Arabs, we don't have a box. First question they ask you right away is, are you Hispanic, Spanish, or Latino? That's the first question they ask you. I don't know why. Maybe Trump wrote the form. I was filling out this form. I wanted to be counted. Now this form, this part did not go for me, as you can see. I failed this question. I moved on. And they have these questions. What is your race? And they ask you, look at all these boxes here, white, black, all these boxes. Everyone has a box. Samoa, Guam, Fiji, all these boxes. But we, Arabs, we don't have a box. I wanted to check one of these boxes. I almost checked the black box. Because Arabs were very similar to black people. We get profiled. We get blamed for stuff that we don't do. We scare the hell out of white people. We have big families and Sunday dinner and lots of cousins. We do all that kind of stuff. Like the way you know you're one of us is if your family's so big that you're older than your uncle. Like if you ever took your uncle to Chuck E. Cheese, you're one of us. Look at all these other boxes. They have a box that says American Indian. You're not supposed to say American Indian. You're supposed to say Native American. You're not supposed to say American Indian. But they don't say Native American. They don't want to confuse too many people because I think Mike Pence thinks that he's a Native American. They wrote Asian Indian. Now India's in Asia. You don't need to write Asian Indian. But they wrote American Indian, so they had to write Asian Indian. Look at all the Chinese, Filipino, Japanese, Korean, Vietnamese. Sounds like the best food court ever. I didn't check that box. All these boxes. There's nothing left. All that happens is if you don't have a box for you, you get down, and then there's something that says some other race. Some other. Kind of like we don't care. Just write it here. Now, a lot of people in our community did that, and if you're an Arab, if you don't have a box, you check some other race. Now, every Arab has gone through this. They're filling out a college application or a job application. Are there any Arab Americans here today? Yes? All right, don't be too excited. But if everyone has gone through it, and they're frustrated or annoyed, and they don't have their box. So they check other. Now, on the United States Census form, if you check some other race, and you put in an Arab country, do you know what happens to that form? Do you know what happens to that form? You know what they do with that form? They don't burn it. They don't give it to the FBI. They actually file it with white people. Did you know that? Yes. According to the federal government, we're white. White. Scary, right? For you, not for us. But we deserve our own box. Do you guys believe that Arab Americans deserve their own box on the census form? Yes. I want to start a rally right here today at the Masonic Temple of Detroit. We're not white. We're not. We are not white.
That's a strong message, Amer. And I think the question we all have, how do you turn from an academician and someone who studied politics to go into become like a stand-up comedian and push your cause through comedy in such a smart way?
Well, first, Mustafa, thanks for having me. I really appreciate being here with all the, what'd you call them? AUBites?
Yeah. AUB alumni, AUBites.
AUBites, I like it. All the AUBites out there, you know, like my father is an AUB alumni, so I'm very connected to this institution, and I've actually been there and did some performance there about 5 or 6 years ago at AUB as well. So AUB is very important in my life. And look, to me, comedy is storytelling. You know, comedy at its core is protest, right? I always consider myself an activist. Comedy is my weapon. I found that if you make people laugh, they listen to you, right? And comedy is about pointing out the ridiculousness in society sometimes, the hypocrisy in society. And it also requires the artist to be very transparent and honest and vulnerable with the audience. If you understand all those things, then comedy can be a very powerful thing. And we've seen that some of the best social commentators in the last 50 years in America are comedians, right? George Carlin, Dave Chappelle, Richard Pryor, Jon Stewart. In fact, there was a time where more people were getting their news from Jon Stewart than from like real news. So comedy is, you know, people say to me sometimes, you know, you're a comedian. I never know whether you're being serious. I tell them, I'm always being serious. I use humor to tell the truth. I don't use humor to lie or to joke. I use humor to tell the truth. And sometimes, especially with the life of Arab Americans, it's so ridiculous in America sometimes, the way we live and the way we're looked at, that comedy is just a very powerful tool. And so I started to view comedy, I really consider myself an activist first, and comedy is my tool. And it's currently my most effective tool. I still try to do it. You know, I'm an adjunct law professor at a university in Detroit. I went to law school. My mom, who's listening, I think she still tells people I'm a lawyer, but I'm not a lawyer. I think they got over the comedian thing finally. But I'm now full-time comedian, do a lot of community events, travel around the world. I return to Palestine 3 or 4 times a year. I do a comedy festival in Palestine every year, one in Dearborn. I live in Dearborn, which is the Arab American Disneyland, the capital. It's beautiful. It's been under lockdown for the last 2 months. So like, imagine, right? You're in this thing where there's all this beautiful Arab stuff and it's on lockdown. So it's really been very depressing. It's like being at Disneyland and all the rides are closed, you know? But now finally things are opening back up and we're getting back to regular life. But for me, yes, I don't see a big difference between being an activist in one realm and being an activist in another realm. For me, just that realm happens to be comedy.
So how was the comedy scene for comedians from Middle Eastern descent? I know Maz Jobrani was pretty successful. They did the tour, I'm blanking on the name now, with Ahmed, Axis of Evil. It was very popular at one point, but then Maz continued his ascent. The others kind of, we don't see them on the scene anymore. And someone wonders, and some other Arab American, Middle Eastern American comedian rose up, like Dean Ubaidullah and other. So how is that scene? How difficult it is to be part of that, because your message is very, very political, very sharp, and it has like a embedded strong criticism to the American policy in the Middle East.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to use any names of other comedians, but I'll say this. In America, in the sort of mainstream, let's say Hollywood or New York comedy scene, it's okay to be Arab, right? That's a little sexy, Arab or Muslim, but you can't be, you can be black and be oppositional to American hegemony and imperialism and politics and government. You can be Latino and be oppositional, but you still can't be Arab and be oppositional and have access to any sort of mainstream stuff. So there's a lot of Arab American comedians out there who might have been on TV or have radio shows or have TV shows, and their content is about being Arab American, but it's very cultural and it's almost never political in an Arab American way. Like, you'll have some comedians who talk about,
like Tony Shalhoub, he plays your common American, but sure, he doesn't. Yeah,
but Tony, you don't expect it for, Tony's an actor. He's always reading someone else's words. This is the weird thing about being a comedian. A comedian is like the writer and the director and the producer all at once. And people expect the comedian to, talk in a certain way and be a certain critic of. And so the Arab American comedians who are out there, there's not too much critique of American society and the way it looks at us, because you can't do that and be an Arab American comedian and still have access. So for instance, I had a manager and agents for a while, and they would try to get me into comedy clubs, and I would be consistently told that I'm too political. Okay. Now, I know they don't say that to black comedians. I know they don't say that to Latino comedians. And I know a lot of it is Palestine. Palestine is still a 100% red line that you can't touch in Hollywood or mainstream media at all, to be critical of America and Israel in that way. And so, but to me, I always understood that that's okay. I would much rather have some sort of legitimacy with my community than have legitimacy in mainstream media in Hollywood. And as an Arab American right now, it's pretty difficult to have both in a real sort of principled way. And I'm totally okay with that. When I walk around the streets of Jerusalem and someone comes up and says, "Hey, thanks for speaking up for us," that's more important to me than, anyone in Hollywood saying, "Hey, here's a TV show," or whatever.
And you also try to take that humor in the heart of Palestine, right? When you started the 1001 for laughs in Ramallah. Tell us a little bit about this experience, because you rallied behind you a good number of really funny comedian there that were also critical of their situation, either for the Palestinian Authority or for the occupation, and they had this dichotomy to deal with on a daily basis.
Yeah, and so I started going regularly to Palestine, or returning regularly to Palestine to do comedy in 2008, and then I just built up more of an audience. And stand-up comedy wasn't really a thing there at all.
Yeah.
Or in the Arab world for that matter. And then in 2015 was the first year that we did a comedy festival in Palestine. So I would take with me 8 or 9 comedians from America, almost all of them Arab American, and we would do 1 week of shows in Ramallah, Bethlehem, and Jerusalem. And all the shows sold out. Everyone was very excited about it. The first year was actually sponsored by the cultural attaché of the U.S. consulate in Jerusalem. So it was sponsored by the State Department. The second year, it was also sponsored by the State Department, and this is under Obama, both years. The second year was also sponsored by the State Department, and we were very successful, and we were advertising, and everyone was buying tickets. And then 1 week before the festival, the State Department called me and said, hey, we have to pull our sponsorship out of the festival.
Wow.
And I said, what do you mean? They said, well, we just can't. I told them, because I was the grantee, they had already granted me the money. And I said, listen, the money's spent. I paid all the comedians. I bought their plane tickets. Like, this thing's happening. They said, that's fine. We just want you to take our name. Our logo has to come off of everything. Okay?
Just use the money. It's okay.
So it wasn't even, they didn't care about the money. It was something political happened, and I've never gotten the full story, where they were pressured into not being the sponsors of a Palestinian comedy festival, which, as you said, spent some of its time critiquing the occupation and critiquing American policy towards Israel. And so, my first line in those comedy festivals, whenever I got on stage, when the 2 years that America was sponsoring it, my first line was like, Israel gets $3 billion, but, we get 50,000 to do a comedy festival, so let's have a good time, and then after that, I had to start basically finding other ways to finance the comedy festival, and we've done it every summer, except, of course, this summer, we're going to have to go off. But it's become now a staple in Palestine to do stand-up comedy, and so many other young people are finding it as a way to sort of tell stories. Look, the best comedy sometimes come from tragedy. I wrote once, I have this book called Being Palestinian Makes Me Smile, and I wrote in the introduction, I said, you can see somebody, we've all seen somebody laugh so much that they start crying, but you can also see somebody cry so much, they start laughing. And so the two emotions really aren't that different, and like I said, comedy is protest and pointing out the ridiculousness in life. And, there's so much ridiculousness, and the Palestine's complete alternate, like, reality. I tell this joke all the time. I say, Palestine, you meet people in Palestine in a way that you don't meet people anywhere else in the world. I was walking around in Jerusalem like 5 years ago with a friend of mine, and she says, and she wants to introduce me to a friend of hers. And she says, Amer, this is my friend Ahmed. He is amazing. He is the best man you have ever met in your whole life. He was in jail 10 years. That doesn't happen anywhere else. There's nowhere else in the world where you get introduced to somebody and, and I'm supposed to congratulate him. Yes,
of course.
I'm very proud of you. And, there's moms in Palestine who are like ashamed that their sons haven't been to jail yet. Mama, I want to be a doctor. Okay, go to jail first. Okay, make us proud, then you can go be a doctor. So it is an alternate reality. Comedy actually fits very perfectly into places like that, or places like Lebanon. When they don't pick up the trash for 3 years, that's comedy. There's jokes in all of that, and so that's why I think a lot of comedians come out of Lebanon too. You get some comedy.
Adil, Abbas, and they did. I think they did the 4 Laughs show last summer in Baalbek. It was also full house. They did it like for 5 days. That scene is also emerging. I think Adil is on Netflix now. So you're right. بالعربي بيقولوا شر البلية ما يضحك.
Yeah.
So that applies to the fact that we do comedy just to laugh out our anger and frustration in society.
It's definitely therapeutic.
It is.
Definitely, when I do shows in Palestine, I feel the laughter in a different way. So I'll go do shows sometimes in the Gulf, and, they laugh. But Palestine, you feel the release. You can feel it in the room in Palestine. So it is something different for sure.
So we have two quick questions, one from Ali Halawi, one from Lina Jazi. Ali is saying, sometimes comedians overdo it by making fun of their background. have you ever been criticized, and when do you know not to cross the line? And Lena is saying, laughing is by no means an easy task, and avoid offending your audience is probably just as hard. When has it been your biggest challenge in that regard? So both of them are in the same, when do you know not to cross the line?
So as a comedian, I feel like it's my job to go up as far as I can to the line, okay? And the line is different so the line in Kuwait is different than the line in Lebanon, is different than the line in America. But my job is to go up to the line, and when I get to it, to try to push it, okay? And maybe just sort of like start to put my foot over the line, but never actually step down, you know? It is, I want to push people, you know, make them a little uncomfortable, but you don't want to offend. And that takes a lot of practice. I mean, I've messed up, obviously, many times, especially in the beginning. But that creates, I think, the best comedy show. And also, it's very important that comedy is always, we say, punching up. So for instance, it's okay to use humor to go after someone who has power over you or dominion over you, because you're in a position of, let's say, weakness. And so comedy is the way that you punch out of that position, or try to, or punch inward, right? You know, talk about yourself, talk about your own culture. So as far as I'm concerned, for instance, there's no limits on, you know, sometimes people will come up to me after a show and they'll say, like, you know, Aib, or this, you know, this stupid word in Arabic, Aib, and it's like, you know, look, if we cannot, one of the problems I think every culture has, okay, not just us, but especially Arabs sometimes, is we have a problem with introspection. You know, like, you know, it's okay to look inside yourself and laugh at yourself, you know, and that actually shows a lot of strength and confidence, you know, to be able to do that kind of thing.
Agreed.
And, you know, I get it. Sometimes people feel we're in a position of weakness in the world. So, but we have to be able to be a little introspective about certain things. So I think punching inward and punching up is okay. Now, anytime you do comedy about someone who's in a lower position than you, let's say socially or economically or power-wise, then that's just bullying. That's not, you know, that's not comedy. That's, anyone can do that. So, so yeah, have I sometimes had people tell me I crossed the line? Sure, but that's sort of the nature of the business. You know, if you don't cross the line every now and then, you don't know where it is. So yeah.
Amer, do you write your own material? Because a lot of it is really deep and has whoever is writing needs to know your culture really, really well. So is it you or someone writes for you?
No. I write everything. The stand-up comedian should write all of his or her own material. That's why I say it's different. If you know, Kulthum, the greatest singer of all time in the Arab world, she still sells more albums than anybody else every year. She's been dead for 45 years. We know that she didn't write any of her words. She didn't write any of her music, but we still love to sit and listen, sing her singing. And that's okay that we know that she didn't write anything. If an actor acts and they do a wonderful job acting, and you learn later that they didn't write the script or they didn't direct, you say, that's fine. I didn't expect them to. They're acting someone else's words. But if you watch the whole comedy show for someone, and at the end of the comedy show, you learned that they didn't really write any of the material, you would feel as an audience member sort of like cheated, because there's this sort of like silent understanding between the crowd and the comedian that the comedian is writing, this is everything they're saying is true, and they're writing their own material. Although I still have people come, like my dad is Christian and my mom is Muslim. They're both Palestinian. And I still have people, and I say this in my shows a lot, and people still come up to me after the show. They say, is that true, your dad Christian? I'm like, of course it's true. First of all, who would make that up? You know, why would I make up something that is like, you know, forbidden in every part of our culture? You know, so of course it's true, you know. And so this is the comedian has to write. If you ever found someone who was on stage telling jokes and you found out that they weren't writing it, then that's not stand-up comedy.
Agreed. Again, I remind the attendees, if you want to ask like a question directly to Amer, just raise your hand. We're going to move now. I have several questions. Some of them I will leave them till the end because they're like a summary question and I like them.
Sure.
But before we go there, I want to move now to Amer, the political activist. You were a surrogate candidate for Bernie Sanders. You spoke on mass media, CNN, Fox, you name it, on his behalf. But every time you were in these interviews, you were actually pushing the Arab cause, pushing the Arab American agenda, talking about how sophisticated we are as a sub-society within the American society, and etc. It was a very strong message, and I think everybody will appreciate it. We have like a very short video, about 2 minutes, during the 2016 Bernie Sanders campaign.
And joining me now to discuss this is Amer Zahr, a Palestinian-American comedian and writer, and also an adjunct professor at the University of Detroit Mercy School of Law. Overall, the Arab vote in Michigan, Clinton leading 61% to 33%.
Well, so, that's not what I see. So what I see in Dearborn, I was at a Bernie Sanders rally a couple weeks ago in Dearborn, and it was full of Arab Americans and young Arab Americans, which might not be the kind of people that get polled. If you watch just what's happening on the streets in Dearborn, you really see that a lot of the energy, especially the younger energy, is going more towards Bernie Sanders. Arab Americans in general were a pretty progressive population, especially among the younger ones of us. But I mean, I think that you'll see most of our community voting for Bernie on Tuesday. Right now, billionaires and those who are in the highest strata of the American economy are getting way too many tax breaks, and we know that to be true. I mean, the kind of people that Bernie is bringing to the campaign is so unique. I'll tell you, yesterday, I was at, I'm a Palestinian Arab American. I have a Christian dad, a Muslim mom. Yesterday, I was at a Muslim Americans for Bernie Sanders event in a synagogue in Queens. Okay, that is what this campaign is about. Diversity, new voters, all this excitement. Bernie beats Trump by many more points than Hillary beats Trump. This is about saying, what kind of country do we want to be? Do we want to be the kind of country that keeps destroying the environment, potentially poisons our water, or do we want to be the kind of country that moves forward?
On the big issues of climate change, a moral economy, these are things that Bernie Sanders and the Pope see eye to eye on. You have Senator Sanders going to the Vatican to speak about a moral global economy, and you have Hillary Clinton in California doing $33,000 a person fundraisers. Bernie Sanders is giving a voice to workers, to people who have been disenfranchised by the system.
If Bernie Sanders runs against Trump in the general election, he actually pulls votes from Donald Trump from the middle. So Bernie's just a better candidate overall.
Do you think a Clinton nomination would be a disaster?
I think that she's the only candidate left in the race who could possibly lose to Donald Trump.
You predicted it, Amer.
Well, at the end of that reel, there's me saying to Fox News in October 2016, I said, my real fear is that white, moderate, middle-class Americans who, they don't like Trump that much, but they hate Hillary on economic policy, will vote for Trump in the Midwest, and he'll win. And that's exactly what happened. I just don't understand the two-party system, the way it keeps shooting itself in the foot. I think they're going to lose again, the Democrats, to Trump. I think Biden's another disaster, and we'll see.
So probably tell us a little bit about political activism. I think a lot of us Arab American fear that a little bit. Probably we bring our package with us here to the US. مثل ما بيقولوا بالعربي حيط الحيط ويا رب السترة. We just go to work, we do a good earning, we do very successful careers. But when it comes to political activism, we shy out. And I think you I don't know if you consider first generation or second generation, but I think you guys have kind of wiped out this fear from you. But how do you get there? What advice do you have for people who are listening now and people who will be listening, the hundreds of them, when this video becomes available online?
Well, first, get involved anywhere. I mean, I first started getting involved in politics. Look, one of my main examples for getting involved in politics was my dad. My dad, who's an immigrant refugee to this country. When I was in, I think it was the 5th or 6th grade, my teachers at my public school outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, went on strike. And I remember my dad taking us down there, and we saw the teachers on strike. And then he joined the teachers on, you know, my dad is a lefty progressive. He went to AUB, so he's a lefty.
Yeah, he's left.
and he was marched with the teachers, and then he ran for school board in our district, and he won, and he was on school board for a little while. And so this notion of getting involved politically in political activism, even at the most local levels, because sometimes that's even more important, is how I started out. And so I did that kind of stuff in Michigan for a long time after I came here for college and stayed here. And then in 2016, got involved with Bernie. And the truth is, we Arab Americans are in a certain moment in our sort of political activism, political activist history. A very important moment right now, because in 2016, we gained a lot of, I would say, notoriety and credit. So if you remember in 2016, right before the Michigan primary for president, everyone thought Bernie Sanders was done. And if he loses Michigan, he's kind of got to get out of the race, clear the way for Hillary. And we started organizing in the Arab American community. It was very clear to us that Bernie Sanders was the best candidate for us, mainly because of his rhetoric on Palestine. Okay. Yeah. And Bernie, you know, Bernie doesn't go as far as you or I or almost any Arab American would go, but he fundamentally changes the conversation on Palestine. You know, he's not where we want him to be, but other candidates are openly hostile to us. So, you know, he was someone that we had, someone who we could influence. And we organized in Michigan, and Bernie ended up winning Michigan primary by 20,000 votes against Hillary Clinton. And it was the biggest news of the whole primary season. And it kept him in the primary for all the way until the convention and gave him more power. And that was because of Arab Americans. Arab Americans in Dearborn ended up voting for Bernie at a clip of like 70% over Hillary Clinton. And it was because it was a family affair. People went out and they took their families with them. And we gained a lot of notoriety. And then people like me and Linda Sarsour then became surrogates for Bernie Sanders in 2016 and again in 2020. And so now we're in a moment where we've built up a lot of influence, and we have to be very careful about how we use it. If we simply give it away now, I mean in June, to a presidential candidate because he's not Donald Trump, without getting something from that presidential candidate, especially a presidential candidate like Joe Biden, who is openly hostile to the Palestinian issue, like openly hostile, we really end up squandering a lot of the hard work that activists have done for a long time. So I believe that we have to hold out our vote, keep telling him that he doesn't have it in the bag with us, and that he needs to give us more. Because remember, presidents affect foreign policy way more than they affect domestic policy. And what my fear is with Joe Biden is, because the Democratic establishment decided to run with him for the nomination, what he's doing is he's trying to, we have been able to turn Palestine into a Democrat-Republican issue over the last 4 years, okay? Joe Biden wants to reverse all that. Joe Biden wants to make pro-Israel a bipartisan issue again, okay? He wants to take that back from the Republicans. And that would be very damaging for us.
Of course.
And of course, we understand there's other issues in America, of course. But every community has their own issues that they are really deep in their heart, that they work hard on. And so we have to be very careful in our rhetoric, I think, in the next 3 or 4 months. Look, if the end of October comes around and it's a week before the election and we've gotten nothing from Biden for our efforts and we have to throw our hands up and maybe say, let's vote for him. Okay, maybe. But as long as we have 4 or 5 months to try and squeeze out of him something at the only time he's listening. Remember, candidates don't listen after they get elected. They listen when they're fighting for your vote. And if we can do that, you know, I encourage people to get involved politically now for the next 4 months and be loud. It is, look, you're right. Arab Americans are sometimes a little afraid to get involved politically because we're many times in a precarious position in America. We always have to prove our patriotism more than other people. We have to say how much we love America, you know, all this kind of stuff. And also that makes us not very willing to say no to politicians. But in fact, no is the most powerful thing you can say to a politician. You know, telling a politician how much you love them doesn't really get you that much if they haven't given anything to you yet. Telling a politician that you won't vote for them is way more powerful than telling a politician that you will vote for them. Okay, you should only tell them that you will vote for them after they've given you something. But we tend to sometimes be a community where we're happy to take a picture with a politician. And what I tell people is, don't be the kind of person that wants to take a picture with a politician. Be the kind of person, even in your local community, that does something that's loud enough about a certain issue so that the politician wants to take a picture with you. Because if you're loud enough about anything, those local politicians are going to want to take pictures with you because they know that you're influential in whatever circle you're influential in. And you can do that. Anyone can do that at the local level. You just have to be willing to say no.
And how do you do that, Amer, when you talk about being politically active? I mean, as Arab Americans, we don't have a real lobby here. I mean, it's sparse, it's fragmented between ADC, AAI, and a few other organizations. You did not label yourself with any one of these organizations. You went on your own and you started gathering support from Michigan, but Michigan has a strong, what do you call it, like a platform. But other places, there are a lot of swing states where Arabs are, but I don't think they're organized. Any recommendation, anything from your experience that you can relay here?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's true that we're fragmented, but we also have resources and organizations in many states. And so you can always find them. But listen, you don't need to do it through an organization or a group. You can literally be that person at your city council meeting that is, talking about whether it's pushing your city council to divest from Israel or pushing your city council to recognize Arab American Heritage Month in April every year. Whatever it is, right? You can pick your cause and go there, and trust me, you will be heard, you will be known, right, on a level. And the truth is, if there's an Arab American who lives in a city in Arizona or California or Florida or wherever, they're going to be much more effective in their local politics than I would be, right? They're from that community. So everyone has more influence than they know. They have more power than they know. So go and use that power locally. And we do need to do a better job of building our organizations so that our community sees them as the go-to for certain things. In the 80s and 90s, ADC did a pretty good job of that. And then our communities started becoming fragmented through divisiveness and religion, and a lot of religiosity took over, and the secular Arab unity sort of went away a little bit. I think that's starting to come back a little bit, because maybe people found out that level of religiosity, that might not be the answer either. But that's a different discussion. But we do need to work harder on our institutions, but that should never stop anybody from getting involved, even on a local level. And go run for your city council, run for your school board. I mean, even if you lose, right, it builds up notoriety. You can run again. It is and I don't run because I just happen to think I'm more effective yelling at politicians and pushing them. But we also need people who are running for those kinds of things as well.
So how is the Arab American community currently getting organized to at least get some concessions from Biden? Because I think, obviously, I don't want to speak on anybody's behalf, but I think most of the Arabs will vote for Biden, knowing that he is a staunch Zionist.
Right.
But how have you been part of lobbies or organizations, or are you starting some sort of a movement where we can, go to Biden and tell him, yeah, we'll support you in these states, but you have to start speaking a little bit more positively about the Arab causes, in particular Palestine?
Yeah, I mean, we're actually working, a bunch of Palestinian American activists and leaders and academics, and we'll be publishing it probably next week, a letter of principles that we expect from political candidates to adhere to, or at least address, when it comes to the Palestinian issue. And we're going to do that in a very unified way with lots of very influential and prominent Palestinian American names, and put campaigns, especially the Biden campaign, on notice that we speak for ourselves. You know, right now there's this dynamic in, it's really done by AIPAC, this dynamic to turn Palestine into a Muslim-Jewish thing instead of an Arab issue. And so they end up going to Muslim organizations, sometimes that aren't even Arab, and getting sort of like their view on Palestine. And it's become a big problem. And they're actually many times normalizing with Zionist institutions and people against the wishes of the Palestinian community. So we're doing our best to fight back against that. But yes, our institutions are not as strong as they need to be. Our voice is not as united as it needs to be. And that can be anyone getting involved, right? Anyone out there in America, you can go get involved. There are, let's say the Democratic Party. There are county Democratic parties, state Democratic parties. Sometimes it costs like $10 to join the state Democratic Party, and then you become like a member of the Democratic Party. You can go there, you can start writing platforms for the state party, you can be involved in it. It's gonna be frustrating, it's gonna be difficult, but be that nuisance, you know, be that person. You can do that, anyone can do that. And so there's so many different ways to get involved.
That's very helpful. A lot of people are asking questions about the current situation in the US, and I think it's a perfect segue. Actually, Ali Halawi is saying, what's happening here? What's going on? How can we understand the events better? And it's a good segue. I want to show the third part of who Amer is, an activist, civil rights activist, and try to draw parallelism between events that are happening in the US with events that are happening other parts of the Arab world, specifically in Palestine. Check this video.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Amer Zahr. I am a board member of the ACRL and president of a local organization called New Generation for Palestine. We're very happy that everyone came out here today with the ACRL to show our solidarity. We are not, the biggest mistake anyone can make is to think that we are here today only because of the murder of George Floyd. We're not here only because of that. It's George Floyd, it's Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Tamir Rice, Sandra Bland, Amadou Diallo, Philando Castile, Eric Garner, Michael Brown, Walter Scott, Freddie Gray, Emmett Till. Don't forget any of those names. And that's only a few of them. And we are here today as Arab Americans because we understand a lot of this. 3 days ago in Jerusalem, a man named Iyad Hallat, 32-year-old autistic man, murdered in the streets, 10 shots by Israeli police because they thought he had a gun. He didn't have a gun. He was just a Palestinian in the wrong place at the wrong time, in his own homeland. We see, as Arab Americans, the parallels between what happens in Palestine and what happens here in America. And so we say to police departments around this country, yes, you have to shape up. It's not a matter of a couple bad apples, it's a matter of systemic racism. And we beg you, we demand that you stop sending your police to go train with Israeli police in our homeland.
Bravo. So you have this organization. Do you lead the organization, ACRL, Amer?
No, I'm a board member.
You're a board member. So is it like local for Michigan, or
yeah,
can you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. It's a Detroit Metro-based, basically civil rights organization, sort of like a ACLU for Arab Americans. It takes on civil rights cases periodically. It promotes civil liberties and civil rights, especially when it comes to the Arab American community. It's an organization mostly led by attorneys and activists. And, you know, we do a lot of these things. And especially when it comes to things like this, we have a lot of strong connections with African American organizations here in Detroit. There's, you know, Detroit is 85% Black. Dearborn borders Detroit. It's 55% Arab. A lot of Arab Americans have businesses in Black neighborhoods here in Detroit. And so our fates are intertwined in many ways. And there's been our share of tension between the two communities, but we do our best to build those bridges as well. And I think, you know, look, every Palestinian, every Arab, probably a lot of Lebanese too, right? Because Lebanese have also been occupied by Israel, see that parallel very clearly, right? when you see George Floyd, when you hear about Iyad Halak, this thing of the person with power holding a gun to you because you're not the same color or religion or ethnicity or whatever, and they're willing to shoot you, and there's no accountability. You know, sometimes people say to me, why don't Palestinians go demonstrate in the streets every day like what's happening here in America? I say to them, because we know, see, it's not happening here in America, only very lightly. We know that if we go down in the thousands to go protest in Gaza or Ramallah or Nazareth or Bethlehem or Haifa, we know they'll shoot us. Yeah. And they have. And nobody goes to jail. Like, we know that. And so we've lived that reality. And I think what we have to do as Arab Americans in this moment is to stand with our Black brothers and sisters here in America, because we are, in some ways, also Arab Americans have to do a better job of embracing ourselves as a community of color. Sometimes we still think we're white, sort of, or we strive towards whiteness in some weird way. We're not white. There's a very specific rules as to how you get into the white club, and we don't fit them. Okay, we don't even fit the minimum requirements to get into the white club. We're never getting in, and we need to understand. We need to support Black voices in this moment. We need to talk. We need to be a little introspective, show real solidarity, be introspective about our own biases. Everyone in America is susceptible to anti-Black biases. We definitely have them in our community. We need to understand how white supremacy has worked. Like, yes, like I want cops to stop training in Israel, but American cops didn't need to go to Israel to learn how to murder Black people. They've been doing that for 200 years, 300 years. You know, we just want to cut off that link, but they didn't need to go there to learn how to do that, right? White supremacy in America is not a sort of incidental thing that happens every now and then. It was the way of doing business from the foundations of America, right? White people weren't here for more than 5 years before they started importing slaves and massacring natives. I mean, this notion that white equals America has been from the beginning. And then even when they created the nation in 1787, the first law they passed was a naturalization law that decided how you become a citizen. And in that law, it said that in order to become American, you have to be white. And that was the law from 1790, not until 1800 or 1850, from 1790 until 1952. It was a legal requirement for you to be white to become an American, okay? And this white supremacy notion has been at the heartbeat of America. We have to understand that as Arab Americans, if we're going to start to understand not only our own history, but especially the history of Black Americans in this country. And, you know, I talk about white supremacy in America as like this. Like, let's imagine you see a 60-year-old man who's 500 pounds, okay? And how did he become 500 pounds? He became 500 pounds because he ate donuts every day for every meal for 50 years, okay? So he became morbidly obese. And when he turns 60 years old, he says, you know what? I'm going to turn my life around. I'm not going to eat donuts anymore. And he stops. Okay, fine. What happens when he stops eating donuts? Okay, he'll lose weight, but he's not going to lose weight very quickly, and he's not going to lose even all the weight. He's never going to get to a fully healthy weight because he messed up his body so much. And even when he loses weight, he's going to have stretch marks all over his body. And you know what else? He's going to want to eat a donut every now and then because donuts are delicious. And he's going to have to fight off the urge to eat donuts because donuts tasted really, really good. And he's never going to be fully healthy because of everything he did to himself. And the effects of eating donuts every day for 60 years is always going to be with him. Well, donuts are the white supremacy that America was eating, the racism, the white domination that America was eating. So just because it stopped, and I'm not even saying America has stopped eating donuts, okay? But let's imagine that it has stopped eating donuts. Just because you stop doesn't mean all the effects of that automatically get erased. No, the effects of that still stay with you probably forever. And so it's more about understanding that you went through that point. Instead of America, we have there's something about Americans that they like to forget. Like, well, they say, oh, that was 50 years ago. That was whatever. Arabs, we don't forget, right? Arabs, we think of the world in terms of centuries, right? I was talking with a friend of mine like 5 years ago.
What's the joke Amer you do about the falafel and Jesus sat here?
I was talking with a friend of mine in Palestine like 5 years ago, and we were talking about music. And I said to him, I assume most people here understand Arabic. I said to him, he's like 40 years old. I said to him, بتحب أغاني أم كلثوم؟ قال لي الجديدة مش القديمة. Now, she's been dead 45 years, okay? But I know what he meant. He meant like the songs from the 60s and 70s, not the song. But this is the way we think. We think in very large terms, right? So we have history. So you go to Jerusalem and there's a street named for Salah ad-Din. He's been dead 1,000 years. He has a street. There's a street for Shari' Ali ibn Abi Talib. He's been dead 1,400 years. He has a street. There's a street for Shari' Imra'ul Qais. He was a poet before Islam. He's been dead 1,600 years. He has a street. Okay, this is the way we think. Americans don't think like this, right? So in America, somebody says, they say, oh, this building is 100 years old. And they think that's, very, 100 years old. And then you're in Jerusalem and you're eating a falafel sandwich and you say to the owner of the restaurant, tell me about this restaurant. And he says, well, Jesus ate here. And you're like, all right, well, that's old, And so this is the way we have to apply that thinking to America and to our experience and the Black experience to understand that it's all connected. From the first slaves that were brought here until today is a continuous story. And we can't just say, you forget about that and just move on and lift yourself up. Malcolm X, in that video that you showed that with me speaking at that ACRL event, later in that, I say there's a quote from Malcolm X where he says, if you stick a knife 9 inches to my back and you pull it out 6 inches, that's not progress. If you pull it out all the way, that's also not progress. Only when the wound heals and maybe, you apologize, maybe we can start talking about progress. America hasn't even gotten to the point where it's the American government has never apologized for slavery. So we still live in this world and we have to try to understand how Black people have to function in this world. We'll never understand, but we have to elevate those voices in this time and make the connections without overshadowing to what's going on in Palestine, because it is, to me, a very, very similar situation, and show that solidarity in a way that not only do we stand with you because it's the right thing to do, we stand with you out of a sense of empathy, out of a sense of knowing what it feels like when the person pointing the gun at you thinks you're not a human being. They shot Iyad Halat 10 times. He's autistic, 32-year-old autistic man in his own neighborhood. And no one's going to go to jail. No one's going to we know that, right? And this is the important thing also to understand about, if you want to understand anything about how we should understand this from the point of view of Black Americans, you can also see it in Palestinian Americans. In that, when you see Black Americans down on the streets protesting, whether it was from Ferguson in 2014 or even the civil rights movement in the 60s or all the way until today, when somebody Black is shot by the police or murdered by the police, there's a lot of emotions that you see expressed by the Black community. Anger, sadness, frustration, maybe even rage. But there's one emotion that you never see, and that emotion is shock. You never see that they are shocked, that they are surprised at what's happening to them because it's been happening for so long. Same thing with Palestinians. We're never shocked. No Palestinian was shocked by the murder of Iyad al-Halat, but we still have to speak out and be very loud about it. And that is something that connects us in that way. And we have to understand that about the Black. We can't, as Arab Americans, parrot the voices of white supremacy that say to African Americans, oh, just lift yourselves up and do it. No, the wealth that white people have was handed down to them from 150 years ago, and that generational wealth that they got by Black people working for free for them, and then Black people thrown into the ghettos, and you know what I mean? Like, it's all connected. That donut is very delicious, and they've been eating that donut for a long time. And so we really have to look at it in that sort of historical, comprehensive way.
Kevin Bacon had a nice video that he put on his Facebook about what he called systemic racism, talking exactly about what you said. Yeah. And I encourage everybody to go and check it out. It's an eye opener. It's amazing how social media picked up on a parallelism between the police brutality in the US and that in Israel, and how a lot of it was borrowed from there, like the putting the knee on the neck, the shooting on the limbs, on the eye with the rubber bullets. So you've been very vocal about it. We're approaching.
It's not just a right-wing thing. Joe Biden 2 weeks ago at a church, at a black church, said that maybe we should train police officers not to shoot people in the heart, but to shoot them in the leg. He said that, and he's supposed to be the liberal guy running for. So I mean, this notion, right? I grew up right outside. I grew up for the first 7 years of my life. We lived in Delaware when we first came to America before we moved to Pennsylvania. And so Joe Biden was our senator, right, from 1980 to 1987. And I, as a young kid, was part of that busing program where I was, because we lived in a white neighborhood, and I was bused to a black neighborhood to go to school for 1 year. And that was something else that Joe Biden was against. Look, white supremacy, racism, we have to be very careful, is not a Democrat-Republican thing. You know, it's for instance, if I explain it like this when it comes to us. Imagine an Arab woman who wears hijab. A Republican might look at her, or let's say a conservative might look at her and say, this is America, take that off or get the hell out of here, okay? And a liberal white person will look at her and say, you know, honey, we're very glad that you're here and you can stay here in America, but you know, now that you live here, you don't have to wear that thing on your head anymore. You don't have to wear that oppressive thing on your head. This is America. Okay, so both liberalism and conservatism are both based on very racist, Orientalist notions of what our culture is, and they do that with other cultures too. Remember, the woman that called the police on that man in Central Park 2 weeks ago when he...
Amy Cooper.
She's a Hillary Clinton donor.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, so this is not an issue of liberal Democrat, you know, and sadly, things won't get solved in this country until white people decide that it's going to get solved. And that's the conversation that needs to happen.
Amer, we're at the top of the hour. I think if you have any conclusive remark in 30 seconds, an advice that you would give to the audience, what would that be in these tough times we're living now?
Yeah, well, first of all, I don't have anything to do. So if you want to stay for a few more minutes, I'm okay. But I feel like, you know, Mustafa, you're doing like I tell this joke about my dad. I say, you know, when people are at our house, when people first walk into the house, my dad says, ahlan wa sahlan, ahlan wa sahlan. And, you know, and sometimes for the first 3 hours that somebody is at our house, my dad only says, ahlan wa sahlan. You know, your house is beautiful. Ahlan wa sahlan. The food was delicious. Ahlan wa sahlan. Your kids are so smart. Ahlan wa sahlan. And then there comes a time around 10:30, 11 o'clock where all the men are sitting in the salon. You know, this room in the house, the salon.
Yeah, salon.
That gets vacuumed every day for no reason. It has the pictures of like the Corniche or Jerusalem or whatever. Sure. It's covered in plastic. You know this room. And everyone has already done everything. The men are sitting in the salon. They already drank coffee and tea, and they ate batlawa and kanafi and bizr. And they talked about Palestinians and Jews. And somebody said poetry. And like, you know, it's getting late. You know, everyone has already done everything. And the room is totally silent. And my dad leans back, and he leans forward, and he says, Ahlan wa sahlan.
Ahlan wa sahlan. Yeah, ahlan bil jamii.
Now, this ahlan wa sahlan does not mean welcome to my house.
It's like, time to go.
Time to go. Time to go. So, and then of course we lie to each other. Listen, Arabs, we lie to each other because we have this thing where we lie to each other because we love each other. Okay. For instance, then the man sitting next to my dad looks at my dad and says, you know, George, it's getting late. We should go. And my dad lies to him. No, stay, sleep over. You know, this is a lie, but we lie to each other because we love each other, you know? And so, you know, I'll just say to everybody, you know I got to go, but since I got to go, that means we have another 45 minutes to talk before I got to go. Look, this is the most important thing for us as Arab Americans, to understand sometimes we think that we don't have the power that we do. I think back to 2016 here in Dearborn during the Bernie Sanders primary. They said Bernie Sanders couldn't win. We mobilized our community to go out and vote. We had high turnout and high unity for Bernie Sanders. Why did we vote for Bernie Sanders, by the way? Because Arab American activists made a deal with him and said, say these things about Palestine and we can motivate our community. And why do we want him to say those things? So that we can hold him accountable to those things if he wins, right? Politicians, even though I love Bernie Sanders, but politicians are just tools to get things done for our community. And we went out and we mobilized in 2016 and we got people to vote. And I saw old ladies going to vote for Bernie Sanders, old Arab ladies, 80 years old. I said to them, why are you voting today? And I said to them, who are you voting for? And they said, Bernie Sanders. And I said, why? And they said, because my grandson told me to vote for Bernie Sanders. So we can have a lot of power. And Bernie Sanders won Michigan. And him winning Michigan kept him in the presidential race for 6 more months and gave him a lot of power and the platform he has today. So when someone tells you that Arab Americans can't make a difference in a presidential election at the highest levels, yes, we can. When someone tells you that we can't reach high levels, I was an Arab American who introduced Bernie Sanders at one of his largest rallies this year, is one of the videos that I put out there, and talking about Palestine when I introduced him. So yes, we can get to these high levels. Yes, we don't always win, but that's okay. We need to keep pushing the envelope, pushing, understanding that our power is more than we know. And everyone watching this call, you are more powerful than you know. You have that power, that influence among your own community that's more than you know. There's people in your life that says, I wonder what Mustafa's thinking. I wonder what Ali is thinking. I wonder what Rania is thinking about these political things. They want you to be active. So when you go out there and do it, you're going to realize that you have more influence than you know. Go do it. Go try it. It is something that can really change not only your local community, but maybe have the chance to change Arab Americans as a whole, and we can all do it.
This is great, Amer. Thank you for these concluding remarks. I mean, they're definitely resonating. And I agree with you. We have to be active. We can't sit on the back seat and expect things to happen to us. We have to go through some pains. We have to go through frustration. We have to work hard and to get what we need. And if we don't become active in the civil society, we will never gonna get there. Amer, we can sit with you. ما بنشبع منك. We could sit here and talk for hours and hours and do like a funny, intelligent discussion, which is the best type of discussion. But unfortunately, it's a lot. It's almost 7:10 here. People just finished work, need to go and eat. But again, many thanks, Amer, for joining us today. And again, we're asking all our AUBites to support the university, to support Lebanon, to support Palestine, to support Arab American causes, to support the organizations that are working hard every day to rally our support and to help our causes, ADC, AAI, and now I learned about the ACRL in Michigan, and we know the ACLU. Support them. They need your help. Be vocal. Don't shy out. And God bless you all. God bless Lebanon, Palestine, the Arab world, and America.